Okay, are we live? Let's wait for some comments to come in to know that we're live.
I don't see it yet. Oh, there we are. Yeah. Hi.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm excited to stream this. I think every couple of years there's echo. Let's see. I think I have a thing where I can turn off background noise. Is this better?
I hope it's not me. I can also. Oh, Tana is here. Hey, Tana.
Hi, Tana.
That's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this stream. I thought about doing like a 10-minute Ryan Carniato intro, but I think I don't have that much. Basically, the reason I'm excited about this is that every couple of years the paradigms change, and then you kind of have to figure everything out from scratch again. And we saw that with SPAs. If anybody here has ever maintained like an older one, you'll see data fetching kind of happens in a Redux store or something like that. And it becomes quite difficult. And in the SPA paradigm, I think React Query was really the point where we sort of figured this stuff out. And we're able to write much better, much more maintainable applications. Now we're kind of back at this point where we don't quite know yet how to do it. With React Server Components, we sort of have a couple of different pieces, but they don't quite fit together yet if you want to go sort of from the server to the client and back. So we're kind of using our old patterns, then there's a couple of new patterns, but it doesn't quite fit together yet. And that's why I was so excited when Dominic tweeted a couple of days ago. Is it still your pinned tweet?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, well, my first tweet that got over 1K likes, so I'm gonna pin this for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I was super excited to see this because also in sort of the TRPC world, we were having the exact same problem, and I think if TanStack Query can solve it, then we're also at the point where TRPC can solve it. And yeah, I haven't had time to try any of this out or even look at it. I was busy with starting a new job this week, so I'm super excited
Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm super excited to kind of take a look around and just see what this stuff is.
Yeah. So first of all, I actually think you're pretty right on that. I think that SPAs is obviously the time when React Query was born, and the things that it tried to solve were just problems that existed at the time. And then when things moved more towards server-side rendering, we just tried to adapt and offer solutions to get kind of the best of both worlds, because server-side rendering has up to this point mainly been something like, I want to move the prefetching of the data that I have as early as possible, which means on the server. And there I just fetch some data. But after that, after the first initial render, everything basically still felt like an SPA. So if we were using Next.js with the pages directory, at least I think the way we've been using it was basically use it to speed up the initial render and deliver something that is, not an empty HTML page and then wait for, 2 megabytes of JavaScript, but have at least something rendered, have some data visible for the users, and then have an interactive application that you're using. But with server components, of course, this changes a lot. And for that paradigm, we still had, a good way to integrate with it that wasn't too boilerplatey, and it kind of like it fit very well with the get server-side props or get static props, architecture that Next.js had. But with the new server components, obviously, like code moves a lot more to the server, and I think nothing is figured out in this new way to architect applications right now. It's the things that Next.js obviously like the only big player that has like an integration right now. So we're trying things out. They're caching things on their end. Server actions are still in alpha. Things are still very much in the experimental phase, which is also why the thing that we've been building is very much still experimental. So the funny thing is, everything that we published like really originated from TRPC. So Alex and Julius were I think also jumping together and were just trying out how this works and piggybacking on this Next.js API and kind of saying, hey, we've made this thing. Would this be cool if this would be actually in React Query itself and not in TRPC? We want to use it in TRPC, but it fits more into like what React Query can offer. And so we made it a package in the TenStack query repo, and basically almost one-to-one shipped the code that Alex has sent me. So it's like pretty big thanks to the TRPC crew for pioneering this. And now everyone, Julius is here. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, hey, Julius.
For all the work you're doing, especially this package that we're going to show, I guess.
Yeah, it's quite exciting to see kind of also the communication between the TenStack Query team and the TRPC team. I mean, obviously, TenStack Query has been kind of central to TRPC from the start. I mean, you can use TRPC without it, with a vanilla client or with any other client, but I think last time I checked, around 2/3 of TRPC server installs also install the React Query integration.
Cool.
So it's pretty much the official way of using TRPC.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But there's definitely a mutual interest in getting these things to a great level, and I think that obviously TRPC profits from React Query because they can, offload some of the work, especially when it comes to the client and the user experience from the automatic refetches. But then also it's like the go-to way of things where I forward people to that say, I want a fully typed client where I have my endpoint definitions. I want to define them upfront somehow. And why isn't React Query like more typed, where I can just put this in and I say, yeah, this is basically where React Query ends, at least for the way I see it. And then you have this kind of these tools on top of this. TRPC is one of them. Zodios is another, where you can define a client upfront or a definition of your endpoints, and then you get like the best developer experience, super typed out of it.
Yeah, Blitz also, right?
Blitz also, I think. Yeah, I haven't used it in quite some time. I don't know where they're at the moment. There was some pivot some time back, I think. Don't really know where they're at, but I think they are also still using React Query under the hood, yeah, for the React adapter.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing. I think in open source, there's often kind of this premise of inventing the wheel over and over. And we're reaching kind of a nice place now where a lot of different libraries, for example, use React Query for fetching, or a lot of frameworks now use Vite for their bundling and to take care of a lot of stuff that before everyone kind of did over and over again in slightly different ways.
Yeah.
So this pattern is quite nice.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, should we take a look at this stuff?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I've looked at nothing so far.
So the first thing we have to know is that this is only available in version 5, and the latest version in our docs and everything is version 4. But we've been working on version 5 of React Query for at least 4 or 5 months now. And I actually wanted to move from alpha to beta this week. There's one problem with the new dev tools that we have, which are pretty cool, but something in the bundling broke. It's always the bundling that kind of like that gets us somehow. I don't know, maybe it's ESM related or so, I don't know. Arian is working on it, and once we have that, we'll probably go to beta, which means at this point, I wouldn't expect any more like drastic breaking changes in terms of the APIs. I would consider them mostly stable in terms of the interface. And then I hope that more people will try it out, which means if you want to try this new streaming package in Next.js, you also have to try out our version 5 beta version. So yeah, that's that maybe it helps us with the adoption of it. And I can see Arian is also here. Hey, good to see you. Don't worry about
Arian.
the dev tools. They're amazing, like the way they look and everything. I see Julius just said that. Yeah, he used it with version 4. Don't say that. Like, I want people to try out version 5. I don't know how this can work. I mean, it depends on where the query client comes from, probably.
So should we take a look at this? We have providers here. This looks
You're not,
exactly the same.
You're not sharing anything, so maybe.
Oh, right. Yeah. 1 second. I need to switch to this view.
That's better.
Right. So this looks quite familiar. This looks familiar, but this is new, I think.
That's the new part. Yeah. So first of all, we have to, I think, take a look at the structure where we are at. So when you're usually using React Query in a Next.js application, you still have to provide client components, right? So some people always ask me, like, does it support server components? Like, I want to use it in a server component. And the thing is, when you're using React Query, you probably want it for its interactivity and the refetching that it provides in the browser. So I don't think there's like anything we say you can use it with only server components, because it doesn't make much sense there. There is no deduplication necessary, because that's what's done by fetch on the server anyways. If there are no refetches and there's no state, why would you need a cache for like one request or whatever? So if that's what the expectation is, like, do you support server components? Then maybe the answer is no, we don't support server components, but we support like the new paradigm of the app directory, if you will. But for this, you need to put things in client components. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I think if you're only using server components, none of the benefits that Tensor Query offers really make all that much sense.
Yeah.
I think once you kind of want to fetch data in both server and client components, or you have a complex tree that has some of both, then you start getting to questions of how do you invalidate from one to the other and all of this. And I think that's where TRPC might be able to bring some more benefits, because they kind of can control both ends of that a bit more. But let's go and check this stuff out. So we have
there is just because it comes to my mind like right now. I don't even know if that works or if it's a good idea. But if you would want to only use server components, but you still want to have like a cache that is persisted across requests, you could theoretically use a query client on the server and use just fetch query or prefetch query or whatever, and don't use any of the hooks, and just put that data into your server components output and send it to the client. And then you could even take that query cache that you've created on the server and use our persisters to maybe write it to Redis or whatever, so that with the next request, you could read it out again. And with that, you could build some kind of a server-only cache. But I'm not sure if React Query is the best tool for that, or probably other tools that can do this as well. And I haven't really looked into it. It's just something that came to my mind when I thought about, okay, what would you expect from a caching library to do on the server? You would probably expect it to cache like over multiple requests, right? Not just per one request, because there you have deduplication and you have this the cache API from React anyways. So if you're just using that, it becomes irrelevant. If you want to look into persisting things across requests, then that's a whole different topic and something we have to look at separately. But usually it's about sending things to the client and then having it cached in the browser, and then still having some fetches that are going on from the client as well.
Yeah, and caching kind of on the server and on the client, I think, are very different problems, especially once you sort of get into stuff where different users need to see different things, maybe.
Yeah, so definitely.
So let's take a quick look at the layout. There's nothing surprising here. By the way, chat, is the text size good now?
I can see it fine. So yeah, for me, it's good.
Okay, so here we have get base URL. This looks like a normal get base URL function.
If you to make fetches on the server or on the client. Yeah.
This is new. Use wait query.
Yeah, this is just a custom hook and abstraction over use query, where we are basically providing a number and then waiting for that amount of time. So
okay, yeah. It takes a query key with wait and a number of I guess seconds or milliseconds.
Yeah, it's probably milliseconds, and then it calls an API that basically just awaits for that amount of time, and then it fetches like that and returns the JSON. So there's nothing new about that except that it uses suspense. So that's where the whole thing kind of like comes together. In line 32, we are setting the query into suspense mode, and actually suspense is something that only used to work on the client. So if you try to do this suspense true in, I think, in the pages directory, it won't actually work. Or if you're trying it in the app directory without our streamed hydration, it also won't actually work. I think it either errors or it throws the promise on the server, and it also doesn't work. So there's kind of like suspense on the server didn't really work before this integration, I think.
So suspense on the client, was that already using React suspense boundaries?
Yeah. So suspense on the client, maybe a bit of a detour. I don't think right now suspense on the client is really something that's super good, because suspense on the client has the big problem that it really introduces waterfalls. If you're just on the client in a browser and you have like two queries in one component and they both have suspense, you have this problem that the first query gets executed, it suspends, and then after it's done, it sees the second query and suspends again. So you kind of automatically, if you have two queries on the client and you have suspense for them both, they kind of waterfall. And that's why I think it might make it might. I have a blog post on this topic as well, but it might work for some situations when you only have like one query per component and you don't have like nested components where you need this. But on the server, it becomes a different thing, and the problem is kind of solved with the streaming, because what Next.js or React can do on the server is they execute all the suspense boundaries kind of in parallel, and send things to the client that are not in a suspense boundary that they can render upfront, and then resolve suspense boundaries as they are ready. And that kind of takes away the whole waterfall problem. And even if there is a waterfall problem, it's now on the server, where the latency is usually better than on the client. So I think that's also why Dan Abramov said that, this is now like their vision of how suspense for data fetching should look like. And it's kind of like what they wanted to provide is have suspense for like on the server, because I still don't think on the client it's like the best idea to use.
Yeah, on the client, it always felt difficult because you want all of your queries to fire at the same time as much as that's reasonably possible. And if you have to wait for one to come back first and then the next one, it's just not a very good experience for many types of apps. So what server components basically...
This, I think to bypass this, with the recommended solution is to do prefetching. So you kind of like suspense. I think on the client it wasn't, and that there's some arguments to do this on the server as well to make the experience even better. But with suspense, the idea was never actually to like render the component, find a suspense thingy, a promise that needs to be suspended, and initiate it. The idea was basically always to initiate it earlier, do some prefetching in your router, do some prefetching when the bundle evaluates, whatever. And by the time the component renders, the promise has already started. It might not even suspend anymore because it's already there. But and then you kind of bypass this problem of waterfalls, because you initiate, but the fetching's earlier. But for developer experience, this is kind of weird, because you want to write your component, your use query, and get the data back and work like that. You don't want to go to like a different file and initiate some fetches. That's like the get server-side props approach all over again. So I don't know. It's kind of the opposite of what you'd want as a developer.
I think in some ways it's actually worse than get server-side props. In others, it's better. But with this with this kind of strategy, what I've often found is that you have ensure query data in very strange parts of your router, basically.
Yeah.
And it becomes like, once you start optimizing it, it becomes very difficult for another person to come in and kind of figure out what's going on and why certain data is being loaded at certain points.
Yeah, you need to understand on like a router level which data will be used everywhere on the page, at least for the kind of like for the first load, so that the things that you don't want to block. And then refactoring also becomes more difficult because like nobody knows why this single fetch is there in the router, because you don't know which component is. Maybe the component that needs it actually got moved, I don't know, down the fold or whatever, and then it's actually not needed anymore to fetch it that early. So it's kind of like becomes a bit harder to maintain, I'd say.
Yeah, with server components now, it works kind of differently, right? So they generate a server tree with sort of empty slots, and then that gets sent to the client. And at the same time, kind of the data fetching for all of those slots can start to happen because they don't depend on each other. And then the data sort of streams in. Would you say that's kind of a non-technical way to explain it?
With Suspense, it can start to fetch. Yes, that's exactly what happens. So you traverse the tree and you find a use query that has Suspense true. So the query function starts to run on the server as well, which wasn't the case in traditional like pages and get server props, because the query function was actually running in an effect, so to say, and that wasn't executed on the server at all, which is why you needed this whole prefetching plus hydration approach that is kind of manual. But here with Suspense, the query function runs immediately, and Next.js then gets, or React, I don't know who the two, gets the promise that we return from the query function, and then they can just say, okay, this is one Suspense boundary that we have, so we can show the fallback, and we just continue with the rest. And then when this Suspense boundary finishes, we can stream the result to the client. And the problem that we have without the React Query Streamed Hydration package that we have now, what actually happens is that this would also kind of work, but the data that you fetch wouldn't wind up in the query cache on the client. It would only, like React would execute the query, and it would do the fetching and the suspending, and then it would send down the HTML or the React server components part of it. But it wouldn't actually contain the data that you fetched in your query cache on the client, because nobody sends it there, right? Next.js or React they only send like RSC output to the client. So what we did with this package is to actually kind of just do that, right? So while React sends down the React server components payload, we basically hijack the stream and we dehydrate the query client automatically and send it alongside the stream. And on the client, we basically pick it up and say, oh, there is this use wait query with 100 milliseconds, and this is the data for it, and we put it into the cache, which ensures that then on the client you have the same data in the query cache, and you don't need to refetch again, until you actually want to, when state time elapses or something else happens. So you kind of like get this automatic, the data is automatically put into your query client on the client, if that's an explanation, I guess.
Yeah. So when you say you send the query client to the front end, is that as part of the initial server tree? And what does that query client kind of look at, or how can it be serialized to be sent to the client side?
Yeah. So we do this with dehydration. So this is kind of like the same thing that you did before in get server side props, for example, where you made a new query client, did some prefetching on it, and then basically dehydrated the whole query client. We can maybe just look at the docs for like the old way to do it. If you open the SSR under guides and concepts, then
SSR?
It's there
Yes,
it is,
here.
SSR. And then we just the using Next.js with using hydration. It's a bit further down below. And then maybe you just make it a bit bigger again for everybody to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we can see if we this is already for no, this is underscore app JSX. Okay, that's perfect. So if you scroll down a little bit more, I think there must be an example somewhere where we do get server side props. Exactly. And what we're doing here in get server side props is we're making a new query client. We are prefetching some queries, and then we return the dehydrated query client. And dehydrate basically takes the state and the data and some meta information in a serializable format, and we put that onto like a prop that with a name that we choose, whatever you can return whatever you want from get server side props. And if you scroll up, so in this example, we put it onto a prop called dehydrated state. And if you scroll up a little bit, then we can see what happened in the app TSX. Basically, what happened is that we take these page props, and page props has this dehydrated state, and we pass it to a component that's called hydration boundary. And this component basically picks up these props that it gets from the server, which is just some JSON with metadata, and puts it into the query cache again, right? So that's how data from the server winds up in the browser, basically. And this is the same concept we're still doing with this app directory, just automatically and without you having to dehydrate the client manually and taking the props and putting it in there. This is all just nicely hidden away.
Yeah, and this was already implemented as well by TRPC, right? So this is sort of the same when you use what's it called, the server-side helpers in TRPC.
Yeah, they do the same thing exactly. You also have like a hydrate component in there.
Okay, yeah, this has always worked quite well. I thought the only problem was kind of that get server-side props doesn't feel great and it's blocking. And to kind of not have it block sort of after initial page load, you need to do a lot of work. I think you showed this to me recently. You can sort of check if this is an initial page load or if it's like a subsequent navigation.
Yeah.
And then there's some hacking you can do to basically say, okay, actually, don't wait here until we have the data. But you still see a lot of, I think, Next.js apps that use get server-side props, and the experience is just not that nice when you click on a link and it takes like a second or two until anything happens at all.
Yeah, I think it's actually a huge problem. And with the hydration approach, it kind of works, but with the initial data approach, which is the other thing that you can do, so you could, I think that's the first example that we have a bit higher up, is where you can just not hydrate the whole client, but you just basically like fetch something and get server-side props and then pass it as initial data to your query. And this is super simple because it's co-located. If it's in the same component, if it's further down the tree, or if it's more than one query, then it becomes a bit more difficult. But the big problem about this is that if you have a client-side transition and navigation to that page where you already have data in your client-side cache, get server-side props is executed again because it's executed on every navigation to that page, even if it's a client-side navigation. And this is done because consistency is. As I think Tim said once, consistency was more important than this optimization. But what happens here is that you're actually waiting for this get posts to be done. Then you send it to the client, and there we totally ignore it because initial data is only used the first time the cache entry is created. So with every navigation to that page, you wait for 2 seconds, you send the data down the wire, and then we say, okay, we don't need it, and we throw it away. And that's actually kind of the worst of like all worlds, I would say. It's good for the first page load when you have client-side transitions, which with the next router you often have, because you usually have one page load and then you navigate through other pages. This is actually, the initial data approach is actually not a good one. Can't recommend it.
Yeah, and this was kind of, I would say, the state that most Next.js apps were in currently. Either they kind of concede that data fetching happens on the client, which is great if they're behind a login or something like that, or they do either this pattern or this pattern, and most of them kind of don't do the additional work to get this to work better on client-side navigation, because that sort of thing just isn't very well documented and not very intuitive, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the only hack that I found is to kind of like look at the URL, and if it's like a next data something, then you can basically early return from your get server side props, and you still have the request to get server side props, but it doesn't do anything. Because if you don't do that, there are like a bunch of examples that I've seen that are actually like worse than what you have if you compared to only a client-side navigation. For example, if you have an infinite query and you prefetch the first page on the server, and then you load 3 more pages, you have 4 pages in your cache. If you do a navigation and you go away and then you go back to that page, if get server side prop is executed again and then you dehydrate that state over it, you go back to just 1 page. Right? You basically have 3 pages that you had in your cache, and they're overwritten by the dehydration process, because that will only contain 1 page. So there are all kinds of these little things where you say, well, I really just want this, first time rendering stuff. And then after that, I want to behave like an SPA. And yeah, I think the takeaway for me was that get server side props was never actually meant to be made for seeding a cache, which is what we are mostly using it for. And the question is this better now in the app directory? And is this better now with the streaming hydration approach that we have? We'll see. I don't know yet. It's still very new.
Yeah, there's kind of one other pattern before you get to server components, and that's the React router or remix sort of loaders pattern, where you can just ensure query data at some point in your tree, and then you're not really on the server, but you get kind of a similar experience where you can block if the data isn't in the cache yet.
Yeah. I don't know about Remix. I think we also have an integration in the docs on how it works with Remix, but with React Router, that's actually a pretty good way, because the cache is always the same. So when you transition from one page to the other, you have the same cache. And what ensure query data does is it basically looks in the cache, is there some data for this key? If yes, then we can just return that, and then the transition isn't blocked, and the rest happens with the stale while we validate pattern. But once your loaders move to the server, you don't have information about what is in your client cache. So you own that. That's why you create a new query client in get server side props, right? It's empty all the time. So you always have to fetch, unless you go into the server caching again with I don't know, Redis or whatever. And then we're back to caching things on the server for a user between requests, which is a difficult thing in itself.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. We had these two patterns with this loader pattern, and we had the sort of get server side props type pattern. And both of them are pretty good, but both are also not ideal in different ways. And so that's why I'm really excited now to look at the new thing and kind of see. I see there's already comments asking about caching, which I think is going to be one of the most interesting things to look at.
I can answer the question about if in React Server Components, does it deduplicate or does it delegate to Next.js catch or fetch? It properly deduplicates, I would say, because you only have one query client per request lifecycle that is created. So what that means is that if you have other things apart from fetch that you're doing in your query function, and you happen to have the same query twice somewhere, it should probably deduplicate like React Query does.
Yeah, and maybe one other thing I quickly want to look at is there was this pattern. So let's see, this is a TSX file where you kind of do, so let's say the first one is a server component, and the client component, and you do like a async function server, const data equals await, yeah, sure. And then you return Client component. You do something like
Yeah. So that pattern is pretty much, I would say, equivalent to putting initial data into your query from get server side props. It has like the only significant advantage that it has is that you can, even if it's further down the tree, you can just co-locate it, because you can have a server component in between and then have your server component always be close to your client component, so you don't need to prop drill for that initial data. But it will still have the same problem that I mentioned before, is that if you revalidate your router, your Next.js router, and you basically rerun the server component tree, you will await that find many on the server, and then you send it to the client component where it will be ignored, because initial data, you already have something on the client. So it's a good pattern for first load. It's a bad pattern for any kind of like revalidation that happens, or client-side transition. But what you can do, the same thing is, instead of passing it as an initial data, if you wrap the client component in line 12 into a hydration boundary, you actually have like the same thing as the hydrate approach. So you can just do basically, so hydration boundary, and then I think it's state equals, and then you do
state.
And then you do state equals, and then you need a query client dehydrate the query client. So you need
oh, this was something like this?
Yeah, just the dehydrate on the client. Yeah. Exactly. And then the only thing that changes is that your await prisma.find many has to become like a query client prefetch query, where you're basically taking your example query that you have on the client, and you kind of like, and then you're back to the hydration approach, where you're prefetching on the server, but in a server component, and the client component can automatically pick it up, right?
And what is the effect on that in terms of kind of doing additional server round trips, or spending more time on the server?
Yeah, so with this approach, what happens is, I think the initial load is pretty much the same. So you get the query client, you prefetch it, you hydrate it, it comes to the client. You don't need initial data anymore; it will be picked up automatically. And when you revalidate the route, you will also await that thing on the server, and then you send it to the client component again. But instead of ignoring it there, we will respect it and put it in the cache. So you kind of like you get the revalidation on the server if it runs on the server. I think this is the biggest difference between the two approaches.
Okay, so that's already quite a nice approach. I guess one of the big issues with this is that you have to do it each time.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, it's not quite functioning yet, so because you don't actually have a query client on a server, so you need to create the query client.
Yeah.
This has to be cached with the cache API from React. So you kind of like, you have this boilerplate thing, when actually all you want to do is fetch some data somehow. And I think this is like the one thing where the streamed hydration approach again comes in, is that you basically just write the client component part with the use query as we have it, and you add suspense true to it, and it just works. Yeah.
Okay, Julius is saying that the stream provider is basically doing something like this behind the scenes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
we are dehydrating the client, and we are doing the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, so that means what we were looking at before over here is basically this, but you don't need to do it yourself every time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, then we had here this use wait query, which is just a query that waits and then returns some stuff. We have a component that uses the query. And then we have a bunch of suspense boundaries that call this query. And then here, okay, we put 3 of them in one suspense boundary, which basically just means that we wait for all of them to arrive.
Exactly. So it still triggers them all at the same time, which is a really cool thing because you can't really do this. I think you can't do this on the client, even if you put them in the same suspense boundary. But somehow it starts them all at the same time, but it shows the fallback until all of them have been resolved.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a promise.all for your queries on the client. Okay, so this looks really nice to use. Does this change the invalidation story at all?
Well, I don't know. So what you can do is you can just treat everything like it is right now. So you server render this once, and after that you are basically on the client, and then you still get your refetch on window focus and component mount and stale time and everything as you'd want. But then the question is, how do you combine this with router revalidate or revalidate tag or whatever it is called from Next.js? And this basically depends on how you're going to use mutations. So are we going to do mutations with React Query, or are we going to do mutations with server actions where they actually want you to basically revalidate a route so that it kind of like re-renders the whole tree on the server again? And I don't know that yet because server actions are something that, and the whole revalidation strategy around server actions is something that I haven't wrapped my head around yet so much. So for now, if you're not using server actions, you can just continue to use mutations, and then you invalidate as you normally would. The only difference is that this invalidation then basically fetches from the browser. So the refetches that you get happen on the client, while the initial fetches happen on the server.
Okay, that seems like a pretty good compromise, actually. With the server actions, I also still find their behavior and sort of the caching strategies and the revalidation strategies quite difficult to understand. Do you think we're going to get to a point where libraries sort of wrap around that, or do you see that as sort of remaining a Next.js primitive that people sort of use by its own?
Good question. Yeah. I can see us maybe having maybe Next.js similar to this library, a Next.js specific adapter that provides a mutation hook that's basically built on server actions, where the invalidation then maybe revalidates a whole route or something. I don't know. Haven't thought about it that much. Could be. Yeah, it's a big question mark. I don't know.
Let's see here the question. If you invalidate, does it tell the server to fetch, or does it redo on the
browser
client?
Yeah. So
with this model, it's on the browser, right?
Yeah, if you do query client invalidate queries, it just does it on the browser. If you were to do like this router.revalidate from Next.js, it would actually go to the server, render your whole server tree, send it down as RSC payload, and we would probably put it into the cache again, I would say. So with that, you would get a refetch on the server. And with invalidate queries from the query client, you would get it on the browser. But I'm actually not sure. Like we could just try it out. We could fork this sandbox and make a button, and that button basically just revalidates the route, and we could see what happens. Because I honestly don't know.
Yeah, let's do that. So a button here.
The question is, how would we see that it revalidated? We could. I think we have some logs that say that it fetches in the query function.
Yeah.
And we could basically log if it fetches on the server or on the client. I don't know.
So we would do if get base URL. We could base it on this maybe. Would that work? Or
yeah,
we can just base it on type of window.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's the user. So we do have. I think there's a console log in line 24, and it does show the URL anyways. Okay, cool. So we could just leave it like that. And if the URL basically is like without a prefix, then it's kind of like
client
server, yeah, and you can just append that to the log statement. That also works, yeah. And then we can see where the fetch happens.
And so let's comment this out first, just to make sure. Yeah, so these are all fetching on the server. We saw that very briefly.
And if you open the
there's a console here somewhere. Is it?
Yeah, you need just a browser console, just a Chrome.
Okay, it's just a regular Chrome console.
It's new, yeah. I don't like it that much. I liked it better when it was an inline console. And if you now basically open up the query dev tools at the bottom and maybe just refetch something, then
let's see, you can make this.
Yeah, and then you click on refetch, then we should see a refetch.
Yeah, here we have fetching on the client.
Yep.
And so I guess we could make a client invalidate and a server invalidate button.
Yep. Right.
So let's make the client one.
Yeah, that's an easy one.
So we have a query client here.
Yeah, otherwise we can get it with use query client, and that's not a problem.
We would do
Yep, you probably need to import it if that doesn't work automatically.
Is it just from regular React query?
Yep, sure.
Okay, and then here we do
just to invalidate queries and then without anything. Yeah, just all of them.
And we're missing something. Oh no, now it's working again.
That should already work.
And so we client invalidate. Yeah, that works.
We don't see anything yet because, of course, like the data stays on the screen, and we have no fetching indicator, and we have no different data. So it's kind of like it's. But we can see the log statements. It happens. So that's good.
Yeah, and maybe we can. Yeah, here you can see it.
Yeah, you can see it here, right? And then they're fresh, I think, for 5 seconds, and then they all go to stale.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the version 5 DevTools yet. They're really good.
They're amazing, right? If Arjen is still here, he made all of them. They're written in solid, by the way, and then
awesome.
And they still hook up to like the same query cache, and then we can take the solid DevTools and put them in React. We put them in Svelte. We put them in solid, obviously. So yeah, we now have kind of agnostic DevTools as well for all the adapters, and they look amazing. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's a really big upgrade, even just having the invalidation tools right here. And it feels like the data is easier to see, even with this tiny section of a zoomed-in screen. So let's build a server invalidate button. This is where I'm going to need, I think, a bit of help from you. What are we importing here?
Use router, I guess. Next, yeah. Is that a thing? And then I think it's router.revalidate. I have, it's been some time since I did this. I don't know. I was hoping that TypeScript could guide us on this.
Maybe we will need to consult the documentation here. Use router. Does that pick us?
Yeah, I think this page is mostly about the router.refresh. It is, yeah. Someone in the comments.
Router has to come from Next/navigation.
Okay. Cool.
And then const router equals use router, and
then it's router.refresh apparently. Honestly, before you click that button, I have no idea what happens. Maybe we could pause for a second and think about what should happen.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's call this router refresh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what would we want to happen? What would kind of be the best pattern for this? To me, it feels like we would keep seeing this, and then the new results would stream in as HTML from the server. I think that's kind of what I would want, promise by promise, I would say.
And the updates should be reflected in the query cache, probably, if our streamed hydration thingy works, right?
Yes. But we wouldn't actually see that because it returns the same thing every time, right?
We wouldn't actually see that, but if you go into the query dev tools, you will see when the last data updated at timestamp is, for example. I mean, we could look at that and see when it was last added. But we could also just send like a date.now at the end of the results.
Yeah, so we could do
yeah, question is if that brings hydration mismatches or not, because it runs. Well, no, it just runs on the server. I think it should work. Yeah. Okay.
So when we client invalidate.
Yeah, when we client invalidate, we just have the expected behavior.
Yeah.
Because I know how that works, right? So data stays on the screen, everything refetches from the browser, and then it kind of like goes back. So when you do a router refresh, let me just think about it for a second. So would it suspend again? Because suspense on the server is kind of there. I guess it would, unless we wrap the router.refresh in a start transition. But I think you can. I think it would just suspend, so it shows the fallback again.
Yeah. Well, we could. I think that's what's gonna happen. Let's click.
Okay, well,
let's
that's
click and open the dev tools.
Are we sure
nothing is happening?
Is it the correct method?
Let's see what's on the router here. Router.refresh. Save the file. Let's reload here.
Can you open the network tab and we see if there's anything happening?
Yeah. Well, I just saw that the colors on stuff change. I think we might be hitting Next.js caching stuff here. Let's see.
Well, but that's so the colors changed because of stale time. Can you filter it to fetch requests? And then just clear it and click it again.
Yeah, so we get one of these RSC things here. And I think in Chrome you can't pretty print it yet. What we can do is JSON formatter. I found most JSON formatters, even though this is not valid JSON, they still serialize it, or like they format it. Okay, here we go. We have a body.
But how is the same timestamp coming back? That doesn't make any sense, unless it's like cached or something.
Yeah, this doesn't seem to have any data in it at all. Okay, someone in the comments is saying refresh does its own transition.
Yeah, if it's wrapped in start transition, then I think that's probably a good default, because it means that like the you wouldn't see the suspense fallback if there is a transition. The thing that I don't really understand is why we have no data that comes back. I mean, I would have probably expected that our hack that we are doing that appends data to the cache, like injects to the stream and puts it on the cache, probably doesn't work with a client-side router refresh, because we send some JavaScript and put it on the window object or something. So I think this only works when you're actually like sending down the first HTML page, and not when you do it with something like that. But I would have at least expected the RSC output to be like with the new data on the screen. So that's certainly
and the data didn't look like it had any of this stuff in it.
Can you show it again? Are you sure? Like the last one? Well, I'm fine with just in the DevTools.
Okay, I guess what we could search for actually is the word weighted, for example.
Yeah. Is this the last response that we got?
We can get another one.
Can you just clear everything so that it's gone, and then? Yep.
And let's click this one again. And this is our response. We have the word weighted in it now.
There's nothing.
We do not.
Okay. What does router refresh do? Interesting.
Refresh the current route, making a new request to the server, refetching data requests, and re-rendering server components. The client will merge the updated React server components payload without losing unaffected client-side React or browser state. Is it maybe that what's being cached here is considered either client or browser state, and so the server isn't trying to invalidate it?
No, I don't think the server knows this. I would expect this to just work. I mean, we could, if you want, we can go to the example. We can just remove all of our like use wait query like component calls. Just comment them all out and just return a diff with a date.now or something. And because that kind of just should work.
Yeah. So we can do this and.
Yeah. Okay. So the client invalidate obviously doesn't do anything.
Let's do a router refresh. The other thing that could be happening is that we're hitting weird code sandbox stuff of it hijacking browser globals or something like that. Is that a possibility?
You can open it in a new tab, like full screen the code sandbox. I think it's the button on the right. No, in the bar that emulates a browser bar. There's like
yeah.
buttons, and then this one, yeah. No, the one to the left. This one, yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. So let's see now. Oh, well, the first problem is we have hydration errors, which makes sense if we're serializing it.
Yeah,
if we're sending a
it's
date.
it's the new date stuff. Yeah, I thought about that. Okay, but the router refresh works, right?
Yeah. So
interesting.
That's good news, because I think it. Oh, okay. That it also works here now.
Yeah, it also works here.
What we could do quickly is, just to be sure, get rid of this, uncomment this, and get this in here. That's still the same.
Is it because of suspense boundaries? I don't know. Maybe it does something different with things that are in suspense boundaries. Yeah, it should change.
Yeah, I suspect it might be caching issues. That sounds reasonable. I would say the biggest problem I've had so far with the app directory is kind of, I'm sure the caching makes sense. I just haven't figured out the patterns yet.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with the caching in the app directory that I've stumbled upon is that on top of the caching that you supply with revalidate or the cache strategy on fetch, is that they also have a client-side cache that caches the complete RSC output for client-side navigations for, I think, 5 minutes per default.
Mm-hmm. So
Without
that's where this
proper way
weird
to
thing
customize.
happens, where you send a random number and then you navigate and
you come back and it just gives you the same cached thing.
Yeah.
Because in 5 minutes we don't need to refetch it again. And you have no way of opting out of that at the moment. I think they are going to work on something for that, but it's kind of like, and it's not, I haven't seen any documentation about this client cache. So yeah.
Can you do client invalidation to force the dates to change, then do a server invalidate? So the client invalidate, this works. And if we do a server invalidate, then the same thing happens. So I can search for example, the word waited here again.
Yeah. So what we can see is we can see the providers component. I think it probably has something to do with using suspense boundaries on the server. I don't know, but I think it's just one of the limitations that this approach has right now. I don't know. It's pretty weird.
Yeah,
you
that
could
thing
try
said,
to just add you could try to add an additional, like add this date.now component again, just additionally to the suspense boundaries outside
to break to bust the cache, you mean?
Well, to see if there's something like if something works at all with the refetch, or because this should actually.
So we'll do a client invalidate.
Yeah.
That doesn't change the date because the date was
Server
because it came from the
rendered.
server.
Yeah.
And if that changes.
See, this changes, but the things in the suspense boundary don't change. So now the question is this a general issue with suspense boundaries, or is this because of some of the stuff that we are doing inside of it? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is probably not something we're going to figure out now while streaming.
Yeah. Well, it was a nice. I just wanted to see what happens with the router refresh. It's not what I expected to or hoped to see, but okay, it is what it is.
But even with all that being said, I think this is still by far the best pattern I've seen for using all of this in the app directory, and it makes it a lot more pleasant for kind of pages where you want the data to come in nicely and then invalidate it sort of client side.
Yep.
I think Ryan Carniato had this thing recently where he kind of I can try to, let's see. I don't know. I'll try to copy Ryan's thing. He said it's like 2 apps. Maybe we need to win a bit.
Please.
And the thing is kind of that Next.js with the app directories here, and we kind of want to and are pretending a bit maybe that it's somewhere over there.
What's one app and 2 apps?
So 2 apps, the extreme case would be, I don't know, like Rails, JavaScript, query selector, where you're basically writing like one app for the server, and whether the backend and front end just have completely different logic, or even let's say SPA plus like this.
Yeah.
And one app, I mean, on one hand, you kind of have, I mean, this is one app, right? But I think there's also kind of, this is the goal, right? We had this and it was really nice. And then we kind of kept going further and further to the left just because people wanted more interactivity. And we said, yeah, sure, we'll take this compromise of basically writing two different things that just talk to each other over HTTP, but in exchange we get like modern declarative client-side apps. And I mean, Next also is trying to approach certain performance problems and a lot of other stuff. But I think one of the nice things also is the DX of getting a bit closer again to just being able to write an app and not having to write like an app and a server. But it's maybe not as far over there as people thought or people wanted to be.
Well, the initial reaction was, well, this is just PHP, but I think this with a bit of hyperbole.
Yeah, I think the people who say that, I find it, I don't know. It's quite obvious that it's not just PHP because you have client-side interactivity, right?
Yep.
I'm trying to find Brian had this tweet that really explained it to me, or that really made it make sense to me. Guess we could go it would have been here, I think. Oh no, it was the week before this one. Yeah, this.
Oh yeah, one app and two apps. Okay, so it's fine.
And yeah, I think this is really kind of a big thing, that RSCs, they get us closer to one app than we were before, but they don't quite get us all the way. And I think what you've been working on here is kind of one example of this, of trying to get a little closer to that, of making it all fit together. And it's really exciting to see kind of what the Tanstack query team, the TRPC team, and everybody else who's also working on this is kind of doing to make it feel that way, even if it, you know, involves like building some facades and
So
here's a question maybe. Is load balancing going to be an issue for larger projects?
I don't think I understand the question.
Yeah, I guess this isn't really related to React Query or to any of this, because where your servers are and then how much they can handle doesn't really meaningfully change, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it changes compared to how it was before. Now, maybe can elaborate a bit on the question.
Maybe in the sense that it is a bit more expensive on the server to use the app directory than to use, for example, like an SPA with a Node backend, because you're doing more on the server.
Yeah. Okay.
But I
are.
don't think that's so different to the old hydration model. I've ported some apps and I haven't seen a meaningful amount of cost on Vercel, for example, or cost difference.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously a cost difference from I have no server to now I have a server, right? And I think that's probably, maybe, I don't know, also the way, obviously, why Next.js pushes it so much, because they want people to use a server, they want people to use their servers. It's their business model. So when you add like a server to an application that actually wouldn't need it, then you're kind of obviously having more costs because you need to run the server. But there's still you're not doing this because of the app directory. You should be adding a server when you need a server, without going into I'm doing this because we should use Next.js because it's the standard that gets explained in the React docs, for example. So if you make the decision to, okay, I need a server, I want the advantages of server-side rendering for the app that I'm building, then there probably isn't, as you said, that much cost difference from the old pages model to the app directory model. I also wouldn't see why that would be an influence.
Yeah, I think we've kind of explored this as far as we'll get today. Maybe one question to leave with is, where do you have any idea of where all of this is going to go? Like, this is really nice now. I think this is such a big improvement to how I was using React Query in the app directory before. Is there some kind of master plan to do something else?
Well, not from me at the moment. So I'm very much like enjoying kind of a laid back approach and see how things will turn out, because we have to be like realistic that this is the super far front of things. Like, probably not even 0.1% of all users that write React applications like would really ever like consider in themselves in a situation to actually use something like this. So we here who are exploring this and are experimenting with this are very much on the front of trying these things out, and maybe also shaping where the things are going, which is also the interesting part of this as software engineers. But the article that I wrote a couple of weeks back was more about if you're using like the app directory, or if you're using a framework that has a built-in mechanism for data fetching and mutations that works well and does everything that you need, then there's probably no reason to even bring something in like React Query. Right? I think there are just many people that really like the mental model of React Query, how they've used it in the past. Maybe we are due for like a real shift in thinking how we want things to behave, and we haven't really arrived at that yet. And server components might just be that shift that maybe in a year from now everybody will say, well, React Query, if I have server components, like, why do I even need that, right? Same as we've had this with Remix, because most of the feedback that I got was, if I'm using Remix, I have no need for React Query anymore, which is great if you have a framework that supports all of this and you haven't encountered the other cases that where React Query can help. And I'm all for it when people say, I don't need this tool anymore. I can cut one dependency of my large dependency tree because I have a framework that basically has matured enough to offer all of this themselves. Because, to be honest, when React Query was born, it was out of a need because there wasn't a framework that had all of this built in. So to one extent, I'm super happy that frameworks kind of mature and also pick up a lot of patterns that we have pioneered in the past, just on the client side, right? Revalidation logic, caching, and so on. A lot of things that we see with like the export const revalidate and stuff like that. It's not too similar. It's not too different from how you define stale time on your query client cache, right? So the question is, what about the bridge until we get to this new mental model, or if you don't want to use server components or server actions or whatever to like a full extent. And I think this is also where React Query comes in as a kind of a bridge, because you can start with the paradigm that you're used to, that you've used for the last years maybe, and then gradually try to explore server components and everything in the app directory that comes with it. And you might also come into a situation where you are using both, and there are probably like 3 ways, the way I see it now, to combine those, right? In your app directory, you might have some components that are pure server components, where you have a static header bar that just displays some information. You fetch from the database once on the server and you display it, and it's in a root layout, and that's it, right? You don't need React Query for something like that. And even if you have more interactive parts of your application, you don't need, not every fetch needs to be wrapped in use query, right? You can still mix and match. So you can have server components that fetch and display more static data. You can have super interactive components where you don't fetch on the server at all. You only fetch on the client, where you have maybe an infinite query that gets better modeled with what React Query has to offer. And then maybe you have something in the middle like this, where you have above the fold data that you want to stream in because you don't want to wait for it to be ready, where we are using something like this, where you're pre-fetching basically on the server in a client component, and then streaming it down into your cache for some further interactivity. So I think there is room to mix all of this, and whatever you're going to do, I think it's great that we have all those options. And I think there is no single answer to say you have to use this in the app directory or you have to do it that way. There's just so many options and so many different apps as well, right? It's an interesting times to be in.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see once more people adopt it, kind of what patterns different applications fall into, I think, because you might have some that are mostly RSC, that are almost kind of islands, where you have like, mostly server side stuff, and then small, very interactive things that you just do all the way on the client. And there might also be some that are more hybrid, and then you might have some that are mostly client that just use the server stuff kind of where it's easy and cheap. And yeah, I don't know quite yet what the distribution is going to be for let's say different types of applications, but the people who are building them are going to find out, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So this is also where I'm saying I want people to experiment with this, find the limits, see which apps are good fits for it, see where it's absolute garbage to use React Query, and then we can, iterate on the pieces and offer better abstractions, and everybody can get to build better apps with whichever thing they choose to build. And at the end of the day, that's what we want to make happen.
Yeah, sounds awesome. I think we've kind of covered all of this. Do you have anything else you want to say to the viewers, or anything you want to shout out before we end the stream?
Yeah, there's one comment that I read about that is Next specific, because it relies on use server inserted HTML, which is true. The adapter uses a hook from Next.js to actually inject things into the stream whenever a suspense boundary completes. That is because React doesn't have a way to inject something into a stream at the moment. There is a proposal to add a similar hook directly to React, but it's still open, and Next.js is currently the only one that offers it. So everybody I've talked to actually says we need something like this from React directly and not from Next.js. And I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. And once that's there, we'll probably make this adapter that we have Next unspecific, right, and make it React specific with the integration that React offers. But for now, this is the best that we have. So yeah, we've decided to make this a Next.js specific thing. That's why it has Next.js as a peer dependency, and you have to use it with Next.js.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if they lean to that adapter model, they could also do Next specific revalidation logic.
Yeah, I don't want anything Next specific. That is kind of like that's the point, right? because then we need like adapters for Next, and we already have adapters for different frameworks like React and Solid and Svelte. Now, if inside of React we need another adapter for Next, for Gatsby, for I don't know, Remix and other stuff, then yeah, it's going to be a lot of. I'd rather just keep it React specific with the primitives that React offers. I'm hoping that's enough.
Yeah, otherwise, seeing also Next query and Remix query and Gatsby query.
Well, that would we'd need a lot more time then to work on all the things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you and Aryan and all the other maintainers are doing really good work, but there's a limit.
Yeah, there's definitely a limit, and we're kind of pushing at the moment with version 5. There's so much work going on from Aryan and Lachlan, who are doing like bundling changes and the dev tools and internal changes. I'm really looking forward to version 5. And even though it's an alpha at the moment, I can encourage everyone to please try it out. We have some great changes in there. I think someone already posted it way earlier before. We have easier optimistic updates if that's something you're interested in. We have some great improvements for infinite queries if that's what you're using. So give it a try. We're going to move to beta as soon as the dev tools are ready, this week or next week. And then I'm aiming for a rather short beta phase. And I think a release is the stable release is coming this summer somewhere. Let's say like that. At least that's the goal.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm really excited for it. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for coming on, everybody who watched. Thanks a lot for watching. And
thanks
Dominic,
for having me.
Sure, yeah, Dominic, I'm sure we'll see each other in the not too distant future again.
Absolutely. We live in the same city, so let's go to the next meetup.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
All right. See you.
Bye.